Hello and welcome. I'm Deb Calvert, and this is the People First Productivity Solutions channel here on Bright Talk. For those of you who are new to Bright Talk, let me show you just a couple of cool features. Right below the video panel, you'll see one called Attachments. Be sure and pop open that tab because that's where all the bonus content, all the goodies are all stored up for you. And I encourage you to take as many of those as are useful. A lot of people like to have the slides for each presentation. So I've got those for you. If you want to take those, print those, take notes as we go along, please do. I hope that you will also take advantage of some of the links I've given you. For example, to my LinkedIn profile. I genuinely enjoy having an opportunity to get to know you and to connect with you outside of these little 45-minute segments we have together each month. If you are here live, and I know a lot of you come later on demand, but if you're live, please don't hesitate to post a question for me. I will answer it as we come to it in the natural progression. Of course, anything we don't quite get to, I'll also try to leave a few minutes for that at the end of our time together. When it's all said and done, I hope that you'll leave me a review. That really helps. It helps me to know what's working for you and what you'd like to see done differently. That way, each and every month, maybe we can make it a little bit better. Now, today's topic, this one is a little bit different from some of the things that we've done in the past. This is actually extracted directly out of one of our most popular training courses. It's called Workplace Conversations, and it's available as self-paced e-learning. It's available when we're able to get together as an instructor-led program in the same space. It's also available as a series of webinars, and it's customizable. But out of that training, which is, as I said, one of our most popular courses, this happens to be one of the most popular modules. So I wanted to bring it to you as a way to introduce the training, but more importantly, get some good content out there, something that many of you have asked for in various ways over the years. Now, as we talk about feedback, you're going to notice right off the top that this is not just about giving feedback. In fact, we're going to start with a much harder topic: how to gracefully, graciously accept feedback and not only receive it, but even invite it. And I'll give you lots of reasons for doing that, but trust me, it's important to do that first before you get good at delivering feedback. Now, of course, we all love positive feedback, but we're not going to talk about that today. We are going to discuss critical feedback. I understand that you might call that by some other name. Maybe you call it constructive feedback, but I'm just going to go ahead and use the word critical. I might even say negative feedback because, frankly, that's how it feels to the folks who are hearing the feedback. But having said that, everything that we talk about does also apply to positive feedback. So the tips and the techniques here, maybe I'll try to, if time allows, work in an example or two of some positive feedback. But you can use this universally for every kind of feedback that you both give and receive. Now, as I said, I welcome you to the channel, the People First Productivity Solutions channel here on Bright Talk. I'm Deb, and I just wanted you to know that you can reach out to me anytime. That's my email address. It's my Twitter handle. You're going to find me on LinkedIn because I gave you that link in the attachments. I think it's fine for us to spend 45 minutes. And if that's all you want, that's all you need is some information and some new insights. Well, you will find that here. But I hope that we'll have an opportunity to have bigger, longer, long-term kinds of conversations. And I just want to make it as easy as possible for us to be in touch. Now, what we're about to talk about is an important topic. I don't want to make light of it in any way. but we're going to try to go ahead and pick up where we left off. Bright Talk is great. They were right on that, whatever was going on there. Hope it doesn't happen again. But what I was about to say to you is that we don't want to take this topic too lightly. It is a big topic, feedback. And especially when we're talking about constructive or critical negative feedback, people don't always receive it all that well. But it is important. We can't dodge receiving it. We can't dodge giving it because of its value. There's a saying, an old saying that goes, bad news killed the messenger. And that actually has an interesting sort of an origin. If you ever saw the movie Gladiator, there's an opening scene. It's a huge battle that's waging. There's a war waging between these two factions. And at the end of the day, as was customary in the time, the two camps settled in for the night. War discontinued after the sunset. But they would send a human envoy over from one camp to the other. That messenger was sent over to the enemy camp, and perhaps they were bringing some sort of peace accord. Perhaps they were offering some sort of negotiation, or they were asking for some sort of concession. They were trying to come to terms so that the battle would not have to continue. Well, that movie, Gladiator, you know what happened when the receiving camp did not like what the messenger had to bring? Yeah, that's the scene where the guy goes back to his own camp. He's still on horseback, but he's headless. So bad news literally killed the messenger back in the old days. But we can do better. We don't have to retaliate against the sender. We don't have to take our anger out on the messenger. We can do things a little differently so that we can remember that the messenger probably has a good intention. Don't blame the media for reporting bad news. Don't lash out at the bearer of bad news just because they're a convenient target. Keep in mind that maybe it's not that easy for them to be delivering this bad news. Maybe we should pause to think about their intention. Maybe they're trying to help us. Maybe they're trying to preserve open communication with us. So we may want to open ourselves up a little bit better to what they have to offer. Let me give you another sort of a metaphor here. Let's say I've got a pain somewhere in my body. It hurts. And it's a signal to me that something is wrong. Now, I could ignore it, but chances are that pain will only get worse, might even cause greater complications if I do ignore it. So my alternative is to pay attention, to seek a way that I could heal that pain, that I could recover, that I could get back on track. When it comes to feedback, it's no different. Hearing and paying attention to and responding to feedback is very, very important. Now, what I'm showing you, this comes from research by Gallup. They repeat this research year after year, and they always come up with the same results. This research gives us the top 4 reasons that employees leave organizations. These 4 reasons are all given more frequently than the 5th answer. The 5th answer is because I needed to make more money. Inside your organization, it may not play out in a way where it seems that that's the case. Because here's what happens. They give you a resignation letter, you conduct an exit interview, they say, well, I needed to go make more money, so I took this job. But Gallup's research does things just a little bit differently. Gallup asks people who recently took a new job, they ask them, what was it that caused you to go looking for a new job in the first place? 5th most common, people said I needed to make more money, so I went and found a job that made more money. But higher than that, when it comes to the original reason for leaving, this is what people said. They didn't know how to advance. They didn't know how to be successful. They didn't feel supported. They don't know how they fit in. And it begs the question, who is it in your organization, who is it that's responsible for making sure that people get the feedback and the guidance needed so that they feel supported, they feel a sense of belonging, they know how to succeed, they know how to advance. And if you're being honest, the answer might be you. It's anybody who manages other people. That's who's primarily responsible for retaining employees inside an organization. And that's one reason why feedback, both giving it and receiving it, matters so much. Now, let me segue. We're going to talk about receiving feedback. And I'd like to show you how responses that we usually hear are often ineffective. If we were all together, we'd be doing this as a little role play. We'd give out statuettes for the best actors in our group, but you'll have to put up with me and just doing the two parts myself. So try not to gauge the effectiveness of the feedback given. I know that the feedback given here isn't very effective. We'll talk about that in a moment. But try instead to think about the response. See, we can't control the way people give us feedback, but we certainly can control how we respond to it. So let's say that a manager says to you, your work hasn't been up to par lately. The natural, sometimes spontaneous, not very well thought out response goes like this. That's not true. I've been 100% organized and productive. I'm a good worker. And now we've set up the defensiveness, so the manager responds, well, I wanted to talk to you about that as well. Frankly, you're not such a great worker either. And now you know what comes next. Now it's the full defensive line. Yeah, but I had that dentist appointment last week, and then there was the delay from IT. And Frank hasn't given me any of the data I need for the project either. And now we have set up an impossible situation where there is no good that's going to come from it. We aren't going to diagnose the problem about why the work hasn't been up to par lately. We aren't going to be able to get to a point where anything constructive, positive comes of this, where behavior change might result. Instead, all we've done is set up a place where there is going to be a feeling of unfairness, of being targeted, of having to be defensive, of making excuses, and no good comes from any of this. So, what if, no matter how poorly the feedback were delivered, what would happen if, no matter how bad that was, you could choose from a list of more effective responses? Try these on for size. The manager says, your work hasn't been up to par lately. And you say something like this. You say, if it's true, oh yeah, I understand how you might feel that way. Or if you have no idea what this is all about and you need more information instead of an emotional outburst, instead, you need more information, so you ask for it. You say something like, oh, could you give me some examples, please? If you need to acknowledge it and take down your own defensiveness, just do that. Right, I know, I need to step it up. Lots been going on, no excuse, I've got to do better. Changes the entire conversation and puts both you and the manager in a situation where now you can do something going forward. And if the manager's help is needed, enlist the manager, enlist the person giving you the feedback by saying something like, please, would you help me to understand what it is I could be doing differently? I'd like to be able to do this more effectively. What do you suggest that I do? You see, the power, too often we think that it's the person who's giving the feedback who has all the power. And that's not the case. That's not true of any communication. The person who's receiving the feedback also has an opportunity to take some good from it and to seize control of it. To do that, you have to be sure that you are tuned in, that you're listening, that you're not letting emotions override, and that you're going to be receptive so that you can glean from that feedback what's useful to you. Now, we're doing this because, frankly, We want to model it to other people. Before we ever start giving them feedback, we should be modeling the way to receive it. But on top of that, feedback really is essential. It helps to retain people. We already established that. But we all need feedback, even negative feedback. I mean, imagine this. Let's go to the absurd for just a moment to illustrate the point. Wouldn't it be great? Wouldn't it be awesome if you could go through your whole life without ever hearing any negative feedback? Just think, no matter what you did, no one, your entire life, no one would have ever complained about it, at least not to your face. It would be so nice to never, ever know what other people are thinking, to operate in your own bubble with only your own opinion as a guide. Wouldn't that be awesome? Oh, yeah, you're right. That there might be some downsides to that. True, maybe we wouldn't really ever understand what we were doing wrong or what we could be doing better. Maybe we would have a lot of blind spots. Maybe we'd really slow down our own learning. Maybe we would, you're right. Maybe we'd look really arrogant. Oh, well then the only other choice we have is to get feedback, even negative feedback. And we might as well get used to it because it's unavoidable. We can't escape it, even though I know that idea was just a little bit tempting at first. But when we have feedback, we can tell how others are responding to us. We can see if our messages are being received. We can learn about ourselves by getting somebody else's perspective about us. And we can compare what they're thinking about us, which is based on our outward actions. We can compare that to what we intend to be putting out there for others. You probably wouldn't leave your house without giving yourself a little check in the mirror. Feedback is no different, no matter how experienced, no matter how senior, no matter how awesome you are in the work that you do. A little check in the mirror never hurts. A little fine-tuning is always a good idea. But the truth is, and I know it, the truth is that it's hard. It's difficult. It's painful sometimes to receive feedback, especially when we just want to keep upbeat and positive and moving forward. Pausing to receive and reflect on feedback that's critical, well, that doesn't seem like something that we want to put into our day-to-day. It's counterintuitive. And it's human nature. We have all kinds of reactions to feedback just because we're human. When you hear criticism, these are the most likely reactions. All of them are understandable. None of them, however, are effective in truly helping yourself to grow as a leader. What I'd like you to do, I'd like you just to look on screen at what you think is your strongest, most prohibiting reaction to receiving feedback. Maybe you don't receive feedback because of one of these reasons or something closely akin to it. And that is not to say that what you're experiencing is invalid at all. It's not. Your feelings are your feelings, and they are valid. But the thing that we want to remember here is that even as we're receiving feedback, we want to be in control. And to be in control, we have to be able to respond in a way that isn't purely driven by our emotions. See, all of these reactions on screen, these are all emotional. What triggers that emotion is the underlying truth or potential truth in what somebody's calling to our attention. So if we could just deal with that little nugget of truth in a productive way, we can become more effective and we're able to grow as a result of that feedback. And what I'm describing to you is what real control looks like. Now, I'm going to go ahead and take this tangent because I don't want it to seem that I've glossed over it too quickly. Criticism absolutely does sting. No way around it. Our automatic response to any criticism is some form of pain. A single word of criticism can drum up a lifetime of similar criticism, including self-criticism. So to avoid that pain, we avoid asking for and hearing critical feedback. Now, for some people, and this might apply to you, and maybe it just applies to other people that you may give feedback to. Either way, it's good for you to understand it and be able to empathize. For some people, maybe or maybe not you, the avoidance of criticism is to be overly defensive, to try and justify or minimize the situation you're being criticized for, maybe even to counterattack. For others, criticism is magnified with a lot of self-condemnation being added to the actual criticism. And some people do both. They minimize outwardly and they maximize inwardly. Another very common response is to shift blame or externalize that criticism. By denying responsibility in order to deflect criticism, we think that we're making ourselves look better. Actually, though, in business, we're being viewed as someone with limited potential to lead if we can't accept responsibility. What you're saying when you shift blame is that you're not in control of the situation, and that shows limitations to your effectiveness. So we've got to think of some alternatives here. Try this. In order to swallow the pain of criticism and show a healthy self-interest and self-improvement, you have to be able to separate out the constructive feedback from any that might be destructive or unproductive. And you have to be objective to do that. So you'll objectively ask for examples of behaviors. You'll ask in a very neutral tone of voice for specific situations so that you can understand what it is that's being criticized. And of course, you can also ask for clarification. That'll help so you're not hearing history, you're not hearing your own voice inside your head, you're hearing what is precisely being said so you can focus on that and do something with that instead of something bigger and probably much broader than the criticism being offered to you. So you might say something like, oh, I'd like to understand your perspective better. Please give me some examples. And that's going to help you a lot more. Being able to be neutral, being able to ask for examples, that's putting you back in control, and it will do you a lot more good than with some sort of emotional outburst or reaction like, what are you talking about? I always, or I never, or how could you? The emotion, although you're feeling it and it's valid, will only get you so far. The deeper level understanding will give you a lot more to work with. So, when you are thinking about accepting criticism and even potentially asking for feedback, there are some things you need to do first to check in with yourself. You need to make sure you're ready. Are you ready at this moment in time from this person who's going to give you this feedback? Are you ready for it? Do you genuinely, not just because some person on some webinar told you to, but are you genuinely ready to understand more about how you're perceived by others? And when you think about the people you might receive feedback from, do you trust them enough to hear their input? And here's a hard one. Have you developed enough humility to acknowledge that you have room to grow. Anytime I use the word humility, I like to take a little tangent to define it. Humility does not mean weakness. I'm not talking here about false humility. I'm talking about the general bigger picture of humility, which basically is the acknowledgement that I don't know everything. I don't have all the answers. There are people who have insights I don't, and I could learn from them. I like what C.S. Lewis said about humility. He said, humility is not thinking less of yourself. Humility is thinking of yourself less. That's kind of what I'm going for here. The opposite of humility is pride or ego, and it can be a big old stumbling block because it can get in the way of hearing what people might have to offer for you. Here's another check for readiness. Do you have someone who helps you process what you hear? I'm not talking about someone who indulges you when you're complaining about or denying what you hear. I'm talking about someone who helps you to flesh it out. Someone who, as a coach, says, well, what part of that might be useful? And why do you think they said that to you? And what, if anything, would you do with this information? A coach may help you to sort of balance out the emotional response and the rational one. And might hold up that mirror and give you some self-reflecting so that you can really check what you're doing before you leave. Last but not least, to receive feedback well, you really do have to control your emotions. You have to be able to keep them in check, not because they're invalid, not because you don't have a right to them, not because anybody's trying to suggest that you suppress your personality, but because there's more to it than emotions. And being in control, you get to pick. In this moment, do I want to be emotional or do I want to be effective? Because oftentimes those two things compete with each other. You're in control, you get to decide. Now, before I talk about receiving feedback just a little bit more, let me reframe feedback for you as a different way of looking at it. So we started with the messenger who got his head cut off. Bad news killed the messenger. I'd like you to now think about a whole new metaphor for feedback. I'd like you to think of feedback as a gift. That's probably how it was intended when someone was reaching out to give it to you. They probably meant it as something that would be useful and helpful to you. But I think about some of the gifts I got as a kid. We lived far away from all of our aunts and uncles, so at Christmas time, we'd get packages, and we'd be really, really excited, and of course, we'd have to wait until Christmas morning when, after we unwrapped some of those presents, the hype of the mail delivery wasn't really fulfilled by what was inside the package. And I can think about some things my Aunt Gary used to send me. She would send me these crocheted dolls and blankets and Kleenex box covers, and I really didn't appreciate them. As a kid, that wasn't my thing. So I'd throw them in a closet. I still had to write a thank you note and do all the niceties, but I'd throw them back in the back of a closet. But you know, what's interesting is that I have a couple of those items still. Not all of them. I wish I had more. But I have a whole new use for them now, a whole new appreciation for them, and a sentiment that I didn't have as a kid. At the time, those gifts didn't really fit me. I wanted to re-gift them or to do something else with them. Sometimes when it comes to feedback and people give us that gift, sometimes we want to give it back right away. And that's the emotion driving that sort of a sentiment. But the feedback as a gift means that you will have a use for it perhaps at some point in the future. You might want to look at it just a little bit more closely. Maybe it wasn't exactly what you wanted in the moment, but maybe it was exactly what you needed nonetheless. So now we're going to step it up a notch. You're going to be good at receiving feedback and remain in control when you do. And to step it up a notch, what you would do is actually invite feedback. Invite feedback. Ask for it more often. There are 30 behaviors of leaders that are proven, research-based, proven to make leaders more effective. When leaders use those behaviors, they are able to have employees who are more engaged in the work that they do. Those 30 behaviors, they fall under the 5 practices of exemplary leaders from Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner. But one of those behaviors, it's called number 16 because it just happens to be 16th on the survey. But that particular behavior is, I ask for feedback about how what I do impacts the work of others. So I ask for feedback about how what I do impacts the work of others. You see, that's feedback that's very narrow. It's very focused. Would you believe, though, that number 16, the reason it stands out in those 30 behaviors is that more often worldwide across more than 5 million participants, that particular behavior falls to the bottom in frequency more than any other one does. So I'm telling you, this is hard, and you're not alone if you think it is. But just like the other behaviors on the leadership practices inventory, just like all 30, that one increases engagement of employees, and it makes the leader more effective in leading. So to invite feedback, ask for something narrow. Don't just put out a softball like, hey, as your manager, how am I doing? People won't know what to do with that. They'll feel a little bit suspicious, and they'll give you sort of a platitude, something very generic, because that's what your question suggested you would want. So you're going to be narrow, you're going to be specific, you're going to be interested, you'll listen, you won't be defensive. You're looking to take it in. And no matter what you decide to do with it, thank the person who gave it to you, because they did stick their neck out. They weren't sure what you were going to do with this. It may not have felt entirely safe. So you say, thank you, I really appreciate your willingness to share that with me. You might even say, I'm going to take some time to really reflect on that. I'll let you know what I do with it. And at some point in the future, if you did something with it, you'll let them know. If you didn't, you might tell them why not. Hey, I'm working on this first, or I haven't forgotten about that. I would like to understand more. That wasn't something I had capacity for right now. I mean, people just want to be heard, and it's powerful to receive their feedback. But you're in control. You get to decide what to do with the feedback you receive. You don't have to convince anybody that they're wrong. That's why there's no need to be defensive. You don't have to accept each and every piece of feedback that comes your way. You will pick and choose. You don't have to respond in the moment. You could. Anytime, especially that you get ambushed with feedback that you weren't ready for, you can say, oh, okay, that sounds like something we ought to talk about. I need a few minutes to digest that. Or I am in the midst of a lot of other stuff right now. Can we get back together tomorrow and talk more? Buy the time you need to process in the way that makes sense for you, not to load up both barrels of your gun and come back with guns ablazing, but to be able to be more receptive, to be able to hear, and to be able to extract the nuggets that are going to be useful for you. And you can do all of that no matter how poorly the feedback was delivered. No matter what a terrible job someone did in the way they gave you feedback, you still get to be in charge of how you receive it and what you do with it. Now, with all of that, that was all about receiving feedback, and it truly was intentional that I spent that much time on receiving feedback, because I think that is the heart that you need to give feedback appropriately. I'm going to give you a model. It's a proven model. It really works, and I think you'll like it. But before I give you that model, I want you to first be empathetic and role modeling the way that feedback ought to be received. All right, here it is, the model, the 3W feedback model that really works. Let me explain each piece of it to you. It's the 3W model because there are 3 things that you will say, one right after the other, no discussion in between. And if you do this exactly this way, people will be able to receive your feedback without becoming defensive. You'll be more effective in delivering it in a way that they can receive it and understand it, and you'll help them very quickly get on the path toward the behavior change you're looking for. The first W is what? In this W, you're going to explain the situation and the specifics that you personally observed. As often as possible, try not to give secondhand feedback. It's not very credible. And you really can't speak to something specific if you don't have personal experience and observation of it. Now, of course, you want to do this in as timely a fashion as you can, while the specifics and the situation are still fresh in mind. You'll know that you're not being very specific if you use hyperbole, terms like always and never. And you'll know that you're emotionally charged if you're using a lot of you or blaming sounding terms. To neutralize this, to keep it objective, to make it something that doesn't trigger a defensive response, it would be more like this. Instead of saying, "You're always late, I can't stand that you're late, I can't believe that you're late again," you would instead say something like, "Hey, I wanted to talk to you about the fact that I noticed this morning that you came in at 8:15, and last week, Thursday, it was 8:20, Wednesday was 8:25, and so because we start our work days at 8 o'clock, looks to me like you're missing the start time here." Neutral tone, neutral examples, objective, really nothing there to argue with. That's the what. And then you would go into the why. This is where a little bit of magic happens. The why is where you're explaining the impact. You're explaining why you're even bothering to offer this feedback. Oh, and by the way, if you don't have a why, check yourself. Maybe this is just one of those, you're having a bad day, or you're targeting someone who's a convenient target right now. Maybe you ought to work out the why before you launch into any kind of feedback, because it might not be entirely fair. But when you tell people why it matters, when you make links to the overall mission of our team or to their own personal goals, when you can show them that bigger picture and why this feedback matters, then they are more motivated and more likely to respond. So the what, remember, is, hey, this morning you came in at 8:10. Last Thursday it was 8:20. The day before that it was 8:25. Here's why this matters. We really can't start the production line until we have the reports, and we really can't get the reports until we have your input each morning. And so on all three of those days, our production was slowed down. And we're estimating that cost us the equivalent of a vacation day for someone like you or one of your colleagues. You put it into terms that are relevant and meaningful and personalized to the individual. You wouldn't make it up, by the way. I'm making up my example. Yours will be more elegant, more eloquent, because it'll be real for that individual. And then right after you've given the why, here again, no break. We're not having a conversation yet. What you'll put in right behind there is the third W. This is the way forward. This is where you say what you need to have done differently. It's where you're going to outline the alternatives, if there are any, and it's where you're going to solidify the plan of what your expectations are. Let me run all three of them together for you. Hey, this morning you came in at 8:10, and Thursday last week it was 8:20, Wednesday it was 8:25. On each one of those days, we're waiting for you. We can't start the production line until we have your reports, and we intend to get those by 8:15 to keep everything on track. If things slow down, it actually impairs our vacation pool, and it makes it harder for people to be able to get that time that they've earned. So going forward, what I need to see you doing differently is either be here by 8, that's what your schedule requires, or tell me what's going on. What do we need to do differently? What is it that's causing you to be late? Let's make a plan so that doesn't happen. You see, what we're doing here is we're having the case all laid out in a way that people can see it. They can see we're not picking on them. We're not being arbitrary. We're not letting our emotions cause them to be targeted. This is plain speak, and it outlines for them exactly what the problem is in specifics, why it matters, and the way you'd like to see things done differently. Now, I told you this all works equally well when you've got positive feedback to give someone. So let's check it out. Watch as I give you this positive feedback. Watch for all three of these and how they play in together. Hey, I noticed that you spoke up in today's meeting with some really great research. I hadn't heard any of that before. I especially liked what you said about the slowdowns on the production line over the last 2 weeks. This matters a lot to my department because we've been grappling, trying to get a sense of what that impact was when people are late. And all I could do before now was guess, but now I've got some solid information. So I hope that you'll keep providing that information. In fact, if I could see that on maybe a monthly or a quarterly basis, it would help me tremendously. You give it to people in a way that they can see the value to you. They can see the impact of what they've offered. It's a whole lot better than an attaboy or a pat on the back or a nice job, thumbs up. When you put those specifics in there, one of the advantages you have is that you are telling others, if you give this publicly, you're also telling others what you'd like to see replicated. Now, I've taken a couple of questions that came up along the way. I think I folded those in okay. But last call, we've only got a couple more minutes together. If we were here together, if this was the Workplace Conversations program, we'd be doing some role play and some practices. We'd go in breakout rooms. You would become masters of 3W feedback. But since we don't have that luxury here in a one-way format today, I'm going to invite you to do that anyway, to go out and practice 3W feedback, constructive as well as positive feedback, and then report back to me. Let me know how it worked for you. Give me some ideas. Keep your questions coming to me. I gave you my email address. You have my LinkedIn connection information and the attachments and links, as well as a whole bunch of other really good stuff. I hope you'll take me up on all of it. But if there are no other questions here today, I'm going to leave you with this parting little thought. And that is from Ken Blanchard, that feedback is the breakfast of champions. You had to start every single day with a little bit of feedback. It won't be as uncomfortable 10 times from now as it is now. 20 times from now, it'll feel like it's just routine. And in about 30 times or so, you'll actually be waiting for it, looking for it, hungry for it. And you'll be getting better and better and better in whatever work you do as a result of that feedback. Well, thanks for being here. I'm Deb Calvert. This is the People First Productivity Solutions channel on Bright Talk. I have a presentation here every month for folks in HR and for managers and leaders. And there's a whole host of previous content that you can access on demand as well. Let's be in touch, and I strongly encourage you, go and get that feedback. It's high value for you, and it's high value for the people that you're modeling that practice to. Modeling to them the value of feedback and how important it can be in any type of a job.